I'm Daisy Fancourt and I'm a Professor of Psychobiology and Epidemiology. Welcome to my exp. The arts encompass a broad range of human practices that have been present in every human culture since at least Paleolithic times. They primarily involve creativity, imagination, appreciation for their beauty and aesthetics, and some kind of emotional expression. Although the styles and genres can vary in different cultures, we often see certain common art forms, things like crafts, visual arts, performing arts, music. When we think and look back at history, we actually see that the arts have been embedded within health and healing right from their first involvement, their first usage by humans. And across every single medical tradition, we find discussion and examples of the arts being used as parts of medical care. Now, naturally, throughout this, there are plenty of examples that are myth, magic, and superstition. But there are also some really interesting examples where the arts were being used that now we recognise scientifically they might well have been having a health value. So this is by no means a new idea, but it's much more a new scientific approach to actually understanding and quantifying how, what, and why these effects occur. Mechanistically, the reason that this occurs is that when we engage in the arts, it activates pleasure regions within the brain, activates our dopaminergic reward system, which leads to the release of dopamine, a pleasure hormone. It also, when we engage in the arts, gives us opportunities to indulge in negativity. So if we're engaging with sad artworks, for example, or things that are scary, this might, on the surface of it, feel a little bit strange that this might still help us to feel happier and better. But actually, we know that this is because through engaging in the arts to have these more negative emotional experiences, it gives our brains a chance to experience other scenarios, to start to imagine how we might respond to things in real life. It's a concept called predictive coding, and it actually helps our brains to learn and prepare for challenging circumstances we then might face outside of the arts. When we engage in the arts, it also helps us to regulate our emotions. Sometimes this is because we use the arts to avoid things that might be giving us stress or worries. For example, giving us a chance to detach from those things, distract us from them. But other times we use the arts to directly approach those problems. So sometimes when we're engaging in the arts, we're venting negative emotions, for example, or we're using the arts experience as a chance to reappraise, to think about things that might be bothering us. The arts also help us to meet psychological needs that we have. They can give us a chance to feel in control of our lives. Even in just that art experience, that sense of brief control can help us to feel more in control of other aspects of our lives. They can give us a chance to feel mastery, like we have skills in something. They can give us a chance to experience meaning or feel a sense of purpose day to day. And the arts also help us to develop a sense of self-identity. When we engage in the arts, we're not somebody who has a health condition, for example. We can be an artist, a dancer, a musician. These identities are really important to our well-being because they provide us with a kind of psychological resilience, a buffer, so that even if things in life threaten one part of our identity, we have other identities to fall back on that can help to make us feel more secure. These are all effects that can happen if we're already experiencing some kinds of symptoms that are causing us mental distress. But actually engaging in the arts can also be preventative. My team and I have undertaken vast amounts of epidemiological research, which is where we use data from very large-scale cohort studies that have tracked thousands of people over years or decades. And we consistently find that people who are engaged more regularly in arts activities over time have lower odds of developing mental health problems. Now, naturally, you could say, well, are those people who do the arts different? Are they healthier, wealthier? Are they engaged in other behaviours that are beneficial? But we use really sophisticated statistical models to actually tease this apart. And what we find is that this relationship between arts engagement and subsequent improvements and reductions in risk of developing mental health problems is maintained even when we've taken all of those other kinds of factors into account. Within hospitals, we see really critical roles that the arts can play, in terms of enhancing patient experience and supporting staff well-being, but also directly helping to reduce anxiety and stress. Dozens of meta-analyses show that people who listen to music prior to receiving surgery have lower levels of stress and anxiety. This can include things like lower heart rate, sometimes reduced blood pressure as well. It can mean that they have a lower need for anti-anxiety medications. In fact, trials comparing music with anti-anxiety medication prior to surgery often show that the music has been more effective than the medication. The music can also help to reduce the need for sedatives, and it can reduce pain after surgery, so that people who have visual art and music when they're recovering actually have a lower need for opioids. This is so valuable because it can reduce the amounts of side effects people might experience from medication. It can really reduce the potential dependency that might develop, and often does develop, for people who have to have high level of opioids after operations. And it can also reduce critical healthcare costs. We even see these effects in neonates, premature babies, who can experience lower heart rates and blood pressure, and can also have improved oxygen saturation and fewer desaturations whilst they're in intensive care. In fact, premature babies feed better when they are calmer as a result of listening to music, meaning they can put weight on faster and can sometimes even leave hospital sooner. The same socioeconomic factors that predict arts engagement are the same ones that predict mental and physical health outcomes for people. So as a result, it's a really important challenge for us to think, how can we increase equity of engagement in the arts? People used to argue and say that it was to do with individual interest. Maybe someone's not interested in engaging. But actually, major advances in behavioural science, understanding why and how people engage in the arts, are actually showing it's a lot more complex than that. Yes, there can be individual factors, but our motivations to engage are often influenced by things like whether our parents engaged with us when we were younger, whether we're told that this is an important thing for us to consider in our day-to-day lives. And those are modifiable factors that aren't just down to us as individuals alone. They're to do with the context, the societies and communities that we live in. In order to engage in the arts, we often need to have some kind of culture or norm to engage, people that we can look to follow their examples. We also need tangible things, often like buildings, arts venues, sometimes arts supplies. We can need things like education to engage the arts so that we learn the skills for how to do different arts activities. This can be really reliant on things like public funding, politics, and it can even be driven by things like social movements, influencers, what the people we look up to are doing. As a result, if we actually want to change people's engagement in the arts and try and increase that, just like we would be trying to increase other health behaviours, we have to be thinking really seriously, well, what are all of these different barriers, and how can we have coordinated efforts that will help to break these down? The idea about arts and health can still sometimes sound a bit fluffy, something that can be a bit contentious. Does it really have that great an impact? But it's really interesting if you look back over the last few decades. There are major health behaviours that we now all tend to accept. The idea that exercise and diet, for example, are good for our health. But just a few decades ago, there were major debates about this going on, people arguing that actually maybe they weren't that important for health at all. But all these times there were these what I call seatbelt moments. These moments when suddenly the evidence base became strong enough and that the voices of scientists and people working in the space became loud enough that people actually realised, gosh, this is important, and that we then started to see major shifts in people's behaviours as a result. I think we're really getting towards that tipping point when we're thinking about arts as a health behaviour. The World Health Organization is now heavily invested in this space. We're seeing increasing international policy recommendations coming out about the need to fund the arts as a way of supporting population health. Hopefully in the next few years, we will get to that same tipping point, that seatbelt moment, that means that everybody suddenly becomes aware that as well as exercising, as well as eating healthily and getting good sleep, they should also all be engaging in the arts.